Let's say our Asok B'divrei Torah blessing together. Baruch atah Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has made us holy with your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah.
You're in a different room, David.
I am in a different room. That is true. My wife is out at a knitting class, so I am upstairs keeping an eye on my daughter for bedtime. All right. Tim, would you read our Yigdal on 1 foot, please? So as I make this go away. No? Okay.
Sorry. Okay, Yigdal on 1 foot. Yigdal is a prayer said at the end of Friday evening services and also by the many at the beginning of weekday morning services after Matovu and before Birchat HaShakar. It is called Yigdal because that is the first word of the prayer. The last line is often repeated in order to have an even number of verses when singing it.
Thank you. All right. So let's get in. Tybal, would you read about the evolution of Yigdal, please?
The rabbis say in the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 10:1, that all Jews have a place in the world to come, except for those who don't believe. Resurrection is taught in the Torah, which is what the Sadducees thought. Those who don't think the Torah comes from God in some way, and an Epicurus who doesn't think that God is involved in the world. Epicurus comes from Epicurean. Maimonides, commenting on this, writes his 13 articles of faith, of which Ani Mamin is one, about the coming of the Messiah, to say what else a Jew should believe. Emmanuel of Rome writes a poetic version of those articles of faith as part of his work, Machbarot. Daniel ben Judah Dayan of Rome writes a poetic summary of the aforementioned longer poem.
And that is what gets us to Yigdal. Thank you. All right, any questions about how Yigdal came to be? Okay. Seeing
How
none.
did we get, how did we get,
Yeah.
this is the words, but how do we get the music?
The music, there are many different versions of the music, and they come from different communities. So the most common one, in my experience, Yigdal Elohim Chai, Yishabach Nimsa V'Ened El Metzuto, Echad V'En Yachid K'Yichudo, Nelam V'Gam Ein Sof Le'Achduto, and so on, is an Ashkenazi tune written by Leone, I think. But there are a number of Sephardic tunes as well for the same words. And they come from different communities.
David, was this written before the time of the Mishnah, or was this written during the time of the Mishnah?
Sure. So the Mishnah is in step 1. So the general, the seed of Yigdal is planted in the Mishnah. And then the steps that eventually go into becoming Yigdal happen after the Mishnah. So the Mishnah is written around the year 200 CE, and Yigdal is written around the year 1300 CE. So it is after the Mishnah, but it is based in the Mishnah originally. Other questions about how Yigdal came to be? Okay, seeing none, let's go on. Evan, would you be willing to read Yigdal in English, please?
You're gonna mute yourself.
Sorry, it's kind of a small screen. Glorified and praise the living God who exists, but not in time, singular and unique, hidden and unbounded, having no body, not a physical being. We cannot describe God's distinctness.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I don't have my glasses on either. I apologize. God existed before everything, for first of all, but with no beginning. This is the master of the world. All of creation points to God's greatness and sovereignty. Prophetic inspiration was bestowed upon the people God treasured and honored. They never arose in Israel another like Moses, a prophet able to see the very likeness of the divine. By the hand of the prophet, trusted in God's house, Torah is a truthful technique. It's kind of cut off. Thank you. Was given to God's people.
I'm going to move this up to the top. Okay.
By the hand of the prophet, or did I read that already?
Yes, you read 8. You're on number 9.
Okay. God will never alter the divine law, not changing it for another. God knows our innermost thoughts and foresees their consequences from the start. God repays the righteous for their deeds, punishes evildoers in accord with their transgressions. The divine will send us our Messiah at the end of days, redeeming those who wait for the time of God's triumph. God with great mercy will give life to the dead. May God's name be praised forever.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, fun fact, you can't see it in the English, but every line of the Hebrew ends with the syllable to. So, some youth groups, when they are doing Yigdal in services, kids will point to their toes at the end of every line. There are other things also that one can do based off of syllables that sound like English words, but toe is the most common, as it is also the most evident when you look at the Hebrew or when you listen to the Hebrew. Okay. Karen, would you read our Sephardic editions from some communities only?
Okay. These are the 13 fundamentals. They are the foundations of the religion of God and the divine law. The Torah of Moses and his prophecy is true, blessed for eternity by the eternal divine name.
Thank you. All right, so just so that we're clear, Sephardic communities are those that were originally based in Spain, and then when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Christopher Columbus fame kicked out the Jews in 1492, the Sephardic Jews went from Sepharad, which was the name for Spain, to a variety of places. Many of them went to the Ottoman Empire. Some of them went to Western Europe. So you get Sephardic communities in places like Constantinople, in North Africa, in Egypt. You get them in the land of Israel. You get Sephardic communities also in Amsterdam, and from there in London. The first Jews in the United States, or what became the United States, were Sephardic Jews who fled from Spain to Portugal, and then from Portugal to Brazil. And then when the Dutch took over Brazil briefly, they were free from the Spanish Inquisition. And when the Portuguese took over the city of Recife again in Brazil, these 23 Jews fled to another Dutch possession, New Amsterdam.
New York.
Which became New York, exactly. Even before they set up shop there, though, there were Sephardic Jews who came to Curacao, I believe that's how it's pronounced, in the Caribbean. And so they have from the, I believe from the early 1700s, is the oldest synagogue still in use in the Americas. So the Sephardic diaspora is wide, and there's a lot of variation in their melodies because they have gone to so many different places. Questions about the text of Yigdal or Sephardic Jews?
Not a question, just a comment. But
Please.
there was one Ashkenazi named Aser Levi on the boat. Somehow he was in Recife and he left with this Sephardim.
Thank you.
So just to put it in context,
Yeah.
Yigdal is Maimonides,
Yes.
and your evolution anchors it in Sanhedrin.
Yes.
Okay, so that's sort of context, and then a little bit of context later. But the version we have, the poetry we have, is that Maimonides, or is that Emmanuel and Daniel and?
Yes, it's them.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a Maimonidean version? I mean, we have the 13 articles, right?
Right, which I have put as an appendix. But as you'll see when we get there, glancing through them very quickly, they are very long and do not make for much singable or even poetic or even just good poetry. So if anybody's trying to remember those 13 articles, it is much faster to just memorize the Cliff Notes version, which is what we have here. But it's in Hebrew, so it's not as obvious that that's what we're singing.
And is the Sephardic edition kind of like the Chatima? It's not really an addition.
Right. It's an addition to the text of the poetry by from Daniel ben Judah, I think, or maybe it's Judah ben Daniel. But it doesn't add more things to believe.
It's not a 14th thing.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, and for clarification, the term that Cindy used was a chatima. A chatima in modern Hebrew is a signature. So if you buy something in Israel, you might be asked for your chatima, your signature on the credit card receipt. But liturgically speaking, a chatima is a text that comes at the end of a blessing. So if you have a long blessing, for instance, before the Shema in the morning, there's a prayer called Ahava Rabbah, called that because its first two words are Ahava Rabbah. In the evening, before the Shema, we have Ahavat Olam, called that because its first two words are Ahavat Olam. Both of them thank God for revealing the Torah to us. There are revelation prayers. And at the end of those prayers, there's a Baruch Atah Adonai, and then something, 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 something. So because that blessing, starting with Baruch Atah Adonai, comes at the end of the paragraph, at the end of the prayer, it's called a chatima, a signature. So Cindy was saying that these are added on as an epilogue or a coda, depending on whether you want to use a literary or musical analogy, and to add it on at the end of the text, but it's not changing the content of the main body.
Come to a different tune, David?
Yes. Okay. Let's move on to objections and uses. Cindy, would you read this text, please?
Yes. Some people have objected to the idea of reducing Judaism to a list of 13 things to believe. Some people have objected to the idea that the dead will come back to life. In Hungary, the Chevra Kadisha would go house to house on Adar 7, the day Moses was said to have died, and sing Yigdal, repeating the part at the end about the dead being resurrected one day.
Okay, thank you. So we'll have a chance soon to dive into our thoughts on the text, but these are some of the other reasons why this prayer has been controversial. That the idea of how can you say this is what, that Judaism can only is just down to 13 things that you have to believe, or that you have to believe anything, that the idea that the dead will come back to life, you'll get to weigh in on that soon. And then there's also the idea that since it talks about the dead coming back to life someday, that on the 7th of Adar, which would be Adar Bet, the second Adar in a leap year, since it was timed to before Passover, that in Hungary, the Chevra Kadisha, who are the burial society, that they would go door to door and sing Yigdal on Moses' Yortzeit, the anniversary of his passing. All right, questions
David,
about that? Yes, Herb.
Hillel reduced Judaism to one sentence while standing on one leg, so we're told.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people say that all of Judaism is contained in the Shema. And that's, both of those are less than 13 statements, if you will.
That's true. That's true. Hillel's statement is less of a belief than an action protocol, I guess. The story, as a recap, is that there was a man who came to Shammai, another rabbi, and said, I will convert to Judaism if you'll teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot. And Shammai said, you're making a mockery of us. There's no way to do that. Go away. And since Shammai was a builder for his day job, all rabbis had day jobs back then, he chased him away with his building tools. And then the man went to Hillel and said, Hillel, I will convert to Judaism if you teach me the entire Torah while I'm standing on one foot. And Hillel said, okay. So the guy stands on one foot, and Hillel says, what is hateful to you, don't do to other people. The rest is commentary. Now go and study. And the man said, cool. And became Jewish and went and studied after putting down his foot. So that is a summary of Judaism down to one thing to do. It jives well with the Reform movement. When they started, they said, we're on board with all the ethical, interpersonal things that are in the Torah. The ritual things don't feel so necessary these days, so we're not going to worry about them. The Reform movement has since moved to become more traditional since it's starting in the 1800s in what is now Germany. One other thing about that story is that the Jewish version of in a nutshell, that phrase is on one foot. So you'll notice that this source sheet started off with Yigdal, quote, on one foot, which harkens back to that story. So that's a way of reducing Judaism to one to-do, so to speak. Some people do say that the main thing to believe in Judaism is that God is one. There's only one God, which certainly differentiated it from all of the polytheistic religions around at the time. The people who don't like reducing Judaism to a list of 13 things to believe would probably not be so keen on reducing it down to one thing to believe either. And then there are the atheist Jews who don't believe in it at all. But since Judaism is a religion, but also culture and a people, you can be a Jewish atheist, whereas it is very hard to be an atheist and other religions as well. So there is all that. But your points are well taken, Herb. Okay. Hopefully my internet will come back quickly so that we can keep looking at the source sheet.
Quick question. Did Rambam claim
Yes.
that this was some sort of distillation of all that one needed to know? That seems shocking.
I don't know. I will look it up well and get back to everybody on that.
There is a book by David Blythe on the 13 principles. I forgot the name. I can go look for it.
Okay, can everybody hear me still?
Yes.
Yes.
No. All right. Can people hear me at this point?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so in that case, I'm going to keep teaching now from my phone. And you'll get the source sheet whenever the internet decides to cooperate. So, Yigdal had a detour to go to church. One day. The story goes that a choir took place on a Friday night and liked it so much that he approached Michael Leone, who was the composer Chazan and the choir master at the time, and he asked if the tune could be used as a hymn. And Leone said that it could, as long as there was no reference to the Trinity. And so this story, well, it may or may not explains why Thomas Oliver wrote "The God of Abraham Praise," which sounds exactly like the Leone tune for Yigdal. So I'll read the first stanza of it. The God of Abraham praised, who reigns enthroned above, ancient of everlasting days and God of love, Jehovah great I am, by earth and heaven confessed, I bow and bless the sacred name forever blessed. And when I send out the source sheet, you'll be able to see there's a link to a recording where you can hear Yigdal being sung in church to other words. So that is what I found at least a cool detour for Yigdal. All right, so let's now talk about Yigdal. I'm going to read it again. Actually, no, I'm going to tell you what the questions are. The first questions. And then we can respond to it well after I've read through the 13 points again. So.
Would you like me to put the questions in the chat?
Sure, thank you.
I'll do that, because then
right.
People can at least look at them.
Thank you. So the first question is, what reactions do you have to these? And the second is, what parts work for you and what parts do you have trouble with? What parts work for you and what parts do you have trouble with? All right. So, here we go. Glorify and praise the living God who exists but not in time, singular and unique, hidden and unbounded, Having no body, not a physical being, we cannot describe God's distinctness. God existed before everything, first of all, but with no beginning. This is the master of all the world. All of creation points to God's greatness and sovereignty. Prophetic inspiration was bestowed upon the people God treasured and honored. There never arose in Israel another like Moses, a prophet able to see the very likeness of the divine. By the hand of this prophet, trusted in God's house, Torah, a truthful teaching, was given to God's people. God will never alter the divine law, nor change it for another. God knows our innermost thoughts and foresees the consequences from the start. God repays the righteous for their deeds, punishes evildoers in accord with their transgressions. The divine will send us our Messiah at the end of days, redeeming those who wait for the time of God's triumph. And finally, God with great mercy will give life to the dead. May God's name be praised forever. So, what
David, you froze. We've lost you. You're just frozen and we can't hear you.
While David's trying to get back on. Oh, maybe he is getting back on. David, are you back?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay, I was going to offer to sing while you were trying to get back on.
Sing anyway.
Oh,
Okay,
if you're going to sing, maybe we should pretend David's not here. And I also went to Safaria and took a screenshot of the questions. So that's my virtual background now.
Thank you. Why don't you sing while I go back and try to pull up the source sheet again?
Okay, so I actually have two Sephardi melodies for Yigdal. The older one is based on a Spanish-Portuguese 500-year-old melody called Bendigamos, which is also being used by the Western Sephardim for other prayers besides Yigdal. Yigdal Elohim Chai v'yishtabach nimtza b'yeinei el metziuto echad v'yein yachid keyichudo nelam b'gam ein sof le'achduto. And it just keeps repeating over and over. The other is David made reference to Eastern Sephardim who populated the Ottoman Empire. We call those Mizrahi Jews nowadays. And they tend to have much darker skin, and their garb in ancient days was much closer to what their Arab neighbors wore, and their pronunciation of Hebrew was different from even the Western Sephardim, much less Ashkenazic pronunciation Hebrew. So the very western end of the Ottoman Empire was, of course, Turkey itself. And this has come down to us. It's not 500 years old, but it has come down to us as the Turkish version of Yigdal. Yigdal Elohim Chai v'yishabach nimtza b'yeinei el metziuto echad v'yein yachid keyichudo nelam v'gam ein sof le'achduto ein lo demud aguf v'eino guf lo na'aroch elav gerushato kadmon lechol davar asher nivra Rishon v'yein reshit le'reisito. So you can tell that that is not normal Western style music. And I also sang it in a somewhat higher and more plaintive tone of voice because that is the way much of this Mizrahi music sounds. I was not making fun of it, that I was trying to be authentic. So that's two completely different ends of the Sephardic world, the way they sang the exact same set of words.
Cantor, I've seen, I heard on Motzi, not Motzi, on Erev Shabbat, on Kabbalat Shabbat, the first tune you sang applied to another tefillah that we, or another.
Yes, Ben Digamos has been applied to. I have a Spanish Portuguese style Sephardic book, and I think Ben Digamos is in there with at least half a dozen different prayer texts.
Okay.
Unlike the Constantinople Yigdal, which, as far as I know, is only being used for Yigdal.
Istanbul.
All right.
So, back to you, sir.
They're also rollicking.
Well, I would say that the Mizrahi one is more rollicking than the Ben Digamos. Ben Digamos is pretty stately, and da 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 da. That same melody, I think, pretty much all of the at least half a dozen prayers for which that melody got applied over several centuries, they're all more stately presentations of the same set of words than tended to be done by our Mizrahi Eastern Sephardic cousins.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So thank you all for hanging with me in the technology issues. Hopefully we won't have any more. So I've put the first half of Yigdal on the screen, and thank you, Cindy, for putting it in the chat as well. What are your reactions to this? Are there parts that work for you, and are there parts that don't, that you have trouble with?
Okay, the question I have is the no beginning word.
Number 4.
Yeah, God existed before everything, first of all, but with no beginning. I'm trying to put that in context to understand it. Doesn't everything have to have a beginning? Or not? I don't know.
Yeah.
Everything
Go
is
ahead.
God.
So this is a Jewish philosophy issue, and it goes back to, it's influenced by Aristotle and Plato, actually, from Greece. This idea that everything that moves or that is made, it's because somebody else made it. Somebody else caused everything to happen, and that thing was caused by something else, and that thing was caused by something else. And so the question is, like, what started the first thing? And that is called the prime mover. And God is considered the prime mover. So God started everything else, but nothing could have started God. However, your point as to, like, I don't get it, you are in very good company. The rabbis raised the question, why did the Torah start with the letter Bet instead of Aleph, since Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet? And they said that this is to teach us that the word Breshit, in the beginning, which is the first word of the Torah, starts with a Bet so that we don't try to think about what happened before in the beginning. We don't try to think about how did God get there. All we can think about is what happens moving forward. That's the only opening in the Bet. It's closed on 3 sides, and the only opening faces the rest of the Torah moving forward.
Okay.
So,
and I can just say God is, and I don't have to think about anything else.
exactly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David?
In a
Yeah.
similar sense, David, Science says there was a Big Bang, but nobody knows what that means either. Was there anything that exploded to make a bang, or what was it? So that was also in the beginning, and there had to be something existing before that if there was a Big Bang, because something had to explode.
Exactly. Yeah, very.
Number 7 bothers me. Not the first part. I'm good with Moshe's uniqueness as a prophet, as God described, or has been described, seeing face to face, which is metaphorical. It's not point on. And the last part, or the middle last part, where am I? Oh yeah, a prophet able to see the very likeness of the divine. I kind of object to that. I'm uncomfortable with it. I learned on Har Sinai, in Shemot, when Moshe is on Har Sinai, begging for our forgiveness and getting us back instead, that he finds favor with God, and then he challenges God to show him more things, showing me your essence, your glory, so that I may know how to please you, and keep it coming. And God says, nobody can see me and live. I can show you basically the draft of what there's left when I go by, and I'll cover you with my hand in a cleft of the rock, so that you don't get to see me, but you'll be safe to see the aftermath of my glory. That's as close as you can get, Moshe. And so that's kind of different from the very likeness of the divine, in my opinion. So I have a little bit of trouble with that phrase.
That's fair. Yeah. I think the Torah also has a bit of a contradiction in it, because my recollection, and I'm looking it up right now. Yeah, the very end of the Torah, actually, this is basically where it comes from. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face, or who knew God face to face. So exactly what that means, not entirely clear. Lots of people have, like the commentators say, it's without intermediary, because of the text that you raise. But yes, it is a bit of a troubling turn of phrase.
On
Good.
its face. On its
On its
face.
face, right.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Right.
Are there things that either work for you or are challenging for you?
David, what I have trouble with is God with great mercy will give life to the dead. I think about zombies walking out of their graves, and that I don't believe in the physical resurrection of the dead. Maybe the spiritual.
Yeah. All right.
Dry
What
bones.
about 11?
Dry bones.
All right. Yeah, talk about it.
I was just gonna say, for me, I think the resurrection of the dead, I think it works very strongly for me. I think of God as the creator, the sustainer of all living things, and the force that causes all life to be. And during the Amidah, I believe it's described that God gives life and takes it away, like metaphysically speaking. So on like a cosmic scale. So I think it makes sense to me that in the Messianic age we could have something like this as an event in its literal sense, perhaps. So it doesn't. I guess it kind of works for me. Although I could see the other side too on that subject.
All right. Number 11 was brought up. God repays the righteous for their deeds, punishes evildoers in accord with their transgressions. Do you see that playing out in real life? Or do you see
May-
that playing out? And if you don't, what do you do with this?
Well, it's manifestly false within our
Yeah,
lifetimes.
yes.
I have a thought.
But-
Is
Has
it
been
my turn?
said that that reward comes in the afterlife. And if that's the case, I guess it could exist, but in our experience, we don't see that happening.
Even in the Torah, Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, were punished horribly. They were murdered. They were made to die because they were doing something very positive in their passion for God. They came a little bit too close to the Korban, the sacrifice, and because of that, God had them killed, just murdered them, made them die. I always thought that it always bothered me. I thought they weren't evildoers. They were very passionate about God. And yes, there's a warning about your passion, and you shouldn't just go too far with it. But I just find that hard to take.
I've always suggested that God needs a little anger management.
Oh, at least I think what we do with it communally, if you look at where it is in the service, given that the Amidah, the prayer in some ways is the central part, I mean, it's at the end. David, you might remember, I'm sure you remember the Jewish comedian who has this joke about what you're doing at Yigdal or various things. You're folding up your tallis, you're singing along, you're folding up your tallis. I think even if you look at Friday night when you're not necessarily folding up your tallis, but it's at the end and everybody's ready to get to the oneg or the kiddush. I think that's a communal statement about, well, we want to preserve this because this is part of the history, but let's focus on the music. And it's not a center, what the words say, it's not a linchpin of what we're doing in this service.
You guys not sometimes get announcements to please stay in your seats and sing the song it's before you go, so that they don't do that? And yet they do it anyway, but they're usually admonished when I'm around.
But David, to your point, we sing it. Do we believe what we're singing?
That's
Right.
the question. That's the question.
And I also believe you have to understand what you're singing in order to
Zoya, you're on mute.
so I don't know what just happened. No, I was just saying what the other lady was saying. You know, you have to understand, you know, like when you're reading in Hebrew, you don't always understand the things that you're singing. And like here, when you know, we're talking about number 11, God repays the righteous for their deeds, punishes evildoers and according to their transgressions. Does that also apply like if you're doing teshuvah? I mean, it could go both ways. And then when you talk about God, you know, when you talk about Bereshit, and I have students who always question me, you know, because I teach at a Reform temple, and they always say, like, how do you know there's really is God? And then I have a kid that a student that I tutor for his bar mitzvah, and he tells me, well, you know, like other people said it today, the Big Bang Theory. Like, and I'm like, well, you have to look at it and see, like, who created all this? You know, well, it's science. Well, then who created science? Right? Like it all involves from something. So I was, and you know, I kept throwing his words back at him, and he's like, "Wait a minute, like, what are you doing right now?" You know, like, we have to understand that. I just lost my train of thought. I'll get back to you.
All right.
If I can just toss in the fact that the rabbi with whom I worked, with whom I overlapped, I followed him after he retired in Canada, British Reform trained. He quietly made a comment to me, not in hearing of our congregants, if the members of this or almost any other synagogue actually understood everything they were saying, this place would be totally empty because they wouldn't believe most of it.
Then there's a little girl who heard the Shema translated as, "The Lord is our God, the Lord is one." And she said, "God is 1 year old."
Very cute.
All right, recognizing the time, I'm going to quickly go through what's left in the source sheet, and you can peruse it at your leisure. So, all right. So after this, we have musical versions. There's the most common one, the Leone one. There's a Moroccan one, which is also used in many communities in the high holidays. There's one from the rock group, Jewish American rock group Safam, a Spanish Portuguese one, the Constantinople one that you heard, a Libyan tune, an Amsterdam tune, a London tune, a Kirkau tune, the Bendigamos. So a lot of different tunes. And then Appendix A, because Yigdal is Jewish ideas about God, here are, in Jewish philosophy, there are a number of biblical and rabbinic texts that are cited as basic ideas from which big texts are then built. So here are the basic texts about God from the Torah, from the rest of the Bible, rabbinic literature from the Talmud and the Midrash. And then here's Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith from his commentary on Mishnah Sanhedrin. And so now you can see how it is very, 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 very long and a bit dense. And so that is why there was a desire to condense this into a more understandable set of guidelines. So
in the Siddur.
going to stop the share.